Hello, welcome to the Sports Philanthropy Podcast. I am your host, Roy Kessel, and today we are very excited to have with us special guest Bryce Weiler. Bryce is the founder of the Beautiful Lives Project, and he's going to share the amazing work that they're doing with you today. So, Bryce, welcome to the show.
Hi, Roy. Thank you so much for having me on.
We're excited to have you participating here, and we know that you've put a ton of work into launching this, but I want to take you back earlier in your life and find out about how you developed your passion for sports.
Sports have been important to me since I was very young, growing up listening to NASCAR races, driving around on our driveway in Illinois on a big wheels, listening to my favorite driver, Jeff Gordon, growing up. It was through listening to those NASCAR races that I first started to really learn about sports. Then I started listening to Brian Barnhart commentating Illinois football and basketball, and Don Fisher commentating Indiana Hoosiers football and basketball. Through those two broadcasters, I was able to learn more about the action taking place on the court. When I was in college at the University of Evansville, Marty Simmons, the former head men's basketball coach who is now at Eastern Illinois, gave me the opportunity to sit on his Evansville Aces basketball bench and be a part of his Evansville team. That experience gave me the chance to be a part of college basketball. I was able to shoot free throws before Evansville home games, throw bounce passes and chest passes with players and coaches, and be around college basketball. Furthermore, whenever I was at Evansville, I broadcasted games on the radio as an analyst by studying the style of the play-by-play broadcaster who I was broadcasting with, and also through researching facts on the players and coaches. It was through those experiences that I wanted to start the Beautiful Lives Project in 2017 with my other co-founder, Anthony Icavone, to allow adults and children with disabilities chances to have similar experiences in sports and in other programs throughout the country.
Well, that's an amazing set of experiences, and you talked about listening to all of these games on the radio. I think for many of us growing up, right, the TV wasn't as accessible as things are now, but in your case, it was for a different reason. So why don't you help our listeners understand, with your background and why you chose that course of going through from the broadcasting and radio.
I was born 4 months premature, and for the first couple days of my birth, I was able to see, but then due to either too much light or too much oxygen, it caused the retinas in my eyes to detach, which caused me to be blind. I can see a little light and shadows, not as much as I was able to about 10 years ago. I was more easily able to tell the light and shadows 10 to 15 years ago. Now it's more darkness, and I can't really tell if the light's on or off in the room. I have to remember to turn it on to do a podcast like this, otherwise, I just wouldn't. And so, listening to games on the radio was important to me because of how the broadcasters described what was going on in the pictures and in the game through spoken word pictures. And broadcasting on the radio for me was being able to give back for all those broadcasters who created visual pictures in my head for me as I was growing up.
Well, it's amazing because when you think back, right, people talk about broadcasting and how it's evolved over the last few decades, right? I think when I was growing up, which was mostly in the '70s, I used to listen to all of the baseball games on the radio because almost none of them were on TV. And you had that visualization in your mind, right, of what it looked like. But um, having the benefit of being able to on a sometime basis see it on TV or go to a game in person, that's very different. So take us through from your perspective how you create that visualization for yourself.
I've listened to so many games on the radio, and I've been on basketball courts, soccer fields, baseball fields, softball fields, that I have a visual picture in my head of what is taking place. When I first started broadcasting games, it was harder for me because I didn't really know how to help the play by play broadcaster to describe what I needed him or her to describe. But after broadcasting over 160 games now in a range of sports, there's only so much I can learn about a game that I cannot see. Now I try to help the play-by-play broadcaster to be the best broadcaster he or she can be, and I really work on studying their style to figure out parts where I might need to get them to describe more of what was going on and taking place in the game.
And that's really important because you talked about your own situation, but share a little bit more about why you launched the Beautiful Lives Project and what motivated you to do that.
I started the Beautiful Labs project because I realized the experience I had at Evansville, being able to be around sports and broadcasting games, was not a typical experience for people with disabilities. With the Beautiful Labs project, we do events in sports. We also do events where people with disabilities are able to perform with cheerleading teams or perform with dance teams, do art events. Cheerleading and dance are sports, by the way, but not sometimes considered as one of the mainstream sports. It allows the participants, who can be adults or children of any age, to be able to gain skills in whatever event they are taking part in. But most importantly, the participants are able to realize that there are people in the world who want to help them to be successful and to help them to overcome the obstacles and challenges that people with disabilities face every day. For the hosts of the event, that could be student athletes, art studio directors, cheerleading coaches, and their cheerleading or dance teams. They're able to realize that they can impact people's lives who have disabilities by giving them these opportunities or helping them to find employment in the job sector.
Well, and that's so important because I think that you've got an ability to understand what challenges they're facing and the difficulties. You talked about the job sector. Um, what does that look like in today's world? There's so much technology and so many things that are available, but how do those adapt for people that are visually impaired to be able to participate in the workplace?
Technology really helps those who are blind, and it can help other disabilities as well. But it's also important for the HR managers of a sports team or a company to train their staff to work with certain disabilities, such as setting a budget to purchase accommodations for someone who's blind, someone who's deaf, people who are in a wheelchair. Companies often say they want to hire people who have disabilities, but they never think about the extra costs associated with purchasing accommodations. So, setting that type of a budget is important. Another important factor would be ensuring that HR staff knows Braille and sign language in case someone who's blind comes in for a job interview or someone who's deaf. Another important aspect of the job field search would be ensuring that companies really think about how people with certain disabilities can fill each of the job roles and what accommodations might be needed. Technology is really important for someone who is blind, but if a company is not willing to allow that person who's visually impaired or blind to be able to learn how to navigate through the workspace with an orientation and mobility instructor, the person who's visually impaired or blind may struggle somewhat in being able to adapt to the office based environment.
Yeah, I think there's so many elements of what you just mentioned that people don't give consideration to because I think most people in life have had some type of injury or illness at some point in their life, right? Where you injure something and then you're walking around and all of a sudden it's like, wow, walking didn't used to be this difficult, but now I've got this pain in my toe and my hip and in my leg, and you realize how difficult every step is. And so it's a time when many people start realizing the challenges that somebody with a disability might be facing, right? As you said, whether it's visual, hearing, mobility, any other type of scenario. One of the things that you and I have discussed extensively is how to help organizations, not just sports teams, but all types of sports organizations and businesses, really improve the way that they communicate with the community of individuals that are visually impaired. So take us through a little bit of what you've seen out there in the marketplace and what some of those challenges are.
For websites, it's thinking about gaps in the accessibility, gaps for people who have learning disabilities. Just because someone has trouble understanding written text does not mean that you cannot make the website accessible for them. And that's a gap in the accessibility codes. There are many guidelines on what to do if a person is blind, or for people who are deaf, adding closed captions to the videos. But people who have learning disabilities are often not thought about when it comes to websites. For social media, working to make that accessible for people who are blind or people who have learning disabilities, putting alt text on social media posts, that helps someone who is blind to understand what is going on in the picture. For also on websites, making videos accessible for those who are blind as well as those who are deaf, and then working to ensure that happens at a consistent rate throughout the entire portfolio from websites to social media. In the realm of stadiums, going beyond the accessibility guidelines to make stadiums accessible for people who have learning disabilities, who may struggle to read written text, determining other ways that those individuals are able to be successful. There are not as many guidelines for how to help someone who's blind to make it through a stadium or a large area. So, thinking beyond the accessibility guidelines of how to help someone who is blind or visually impaired. And for those who are in wheelchairs, there are certain guidelines, but there are also gaps in those guidelines. So, it's all about knowing what the guideline is, whether it's in the hiring based type of programs, if it's ensuring the workspace is accessible, ensuring the website and social media is accessible, knowing what the written guidelines are by the laws, whether those be United States, European laws, or Canadian laws, and then thinking about the gaps in those laws. A lot of times people just do what the law says they should do, and they don't try to address the gaps in the law.
So I think that you raised so many critical elements. So I want to back up to kind of the beginning of that process. So when you've done extensive research into these issues, and without calling out necessarily specific teams or organizations, what's your estimate of, like, for Major League Baseball or NFL or the professional leagues, of what percentage of the teams are, we'll call it, reasonably compliant with those requirements?
Baseball and the NHL are doing the best job with that. There's about 75 to 80% of Major League Baseball teams who are close to being accessible with the things that they should be doing on the digital side. With some of those gaps that I talked about in accessibility, that's not something teams are really thinking about. Major League Baseball is doing the best job of this type of work. The NHL is doing second best, and then from that, it is a lesser level in all of the leagues. But just because it is a lesser level today does not mean that these same teams or companies cannot change what they're doing tomorrow or next month or the month after. It's all about changing the mindset. In the companies and teams that I have assisted, both in sports and outside of sports, they have been really willing to learn and to listen to what I have to say about these are gaps in this part of the accessibility code. These are ways that your staff can engage with people who have disabilities. And if someone is willing to learn and willing to listen to what I have to say, I'm going to be able to help them to be successful, because this is what I think about and this is what I do 6.5 days a week. I read through this information, I study what others are doing, and I think about ways that can be improved upon.
So you mentioned MLB and NHL are doing the best. That leaves obviously the NFL, the NBA, MLS on the men's side, that are lagging behind. What can we do as Sports Philanthropy Network and our ambassadors, leadership council supporters? What can people do to help this initiative?
Continue to engage with the staff of teams that are in your city or in your state and get them to begin doing all of these things. For example, certain teams in each of these leagues are putting alt text on their social media posts. Some leagues have a high level of teams doing that. And then some leagues have only one or two teams doing that, or even zero teams putting alt text on social media posts. One real gap in accessibility is putting audio descriptions on videos. There are currently no teams in American or European sports doing that, either on their website or social media. Teams, the teams are not doing that, but also the leagues to which they belong are not doing that either. And the same for companies. People have really started being more conscious about putting closed captioning on videos because there are guidelines that tell someone how to do that and that it has to be done. But since there are really no guidelines for whether someone should put audio descriptions on videos or not, then no one is really doing that. I think the first teams or companies or sports leagues who start putting audio descriptions on their videos on the websites and on social media or on one or the other are really going to be praised very highly and really become known for taking that first innovative step.
Yeah, and I think that as you're talking about all of these things, right? One thing that strikes me is it's obviously a lot of work, right? What you're describing is a lot of moving parts for these organizations. If you were to estimate in terms of how many staff would be needed to handle that between the website and social media for the average, let's just use MLB, NHL, any of the major league teams, what would you estimate that needs to be for a team of that magnitude?
I don't think staff has to be added. These teams have a large amount of staff to begin with. It's motivating the staff to do these things and then having someone like myself or somebody else who knows what should be done and knows where the gaps are in stadium accessibility or in hiring practices or in digital, social, and those type of platforms to tell a staff person what needs to be done and then monitor it to ensure it gets done. So often a sports team may work with a company to assist with accessibility, but this company might work with a lot of other sports teams and companies, so it may not give the amount of time to the sports team or the league or the company that it's working with that it should to ensure that all of these tasks are completed successfully. That's another important aspect to think about. But as far as adding more staff, that would not have to be done because most of this work, especially on the website and social media side, is something that could be done by staff already in place. If a team does want to add audio descriptions on videos, that might take a slight bit more time, but it's still not a large amount of time. The place where more structured changes might need to be implemented would be ensuring that the stadium or the workplace is accessible for the current accessibility guidelines, and then identifying some of those gaps in accessibility guidelines and trying to fix those. And that would maybe need staff to be hired for a smaller construction based project or whatever might need to be whatever is found out after the analysis of the stadium or workplace.
So that's great to hear, right? Because obviously that takes away one of the main objections that we're typically going to get in terms of, organizations saying we don't have the resources or the budget to do that. So I want to ask about two other kind of populations of organizations and get your feedback on how they're doing. So the first is, how do the women's professional sports teams compare in terms of the WNBA and WSL, new hockey league that came online this year? What are you seeing in those leagues?
In certain women's leagues, the league is putting alt text on social media posts. In certain other women's leagues, they are not. And in most of those leagues, the teams within those leagues are not putting alt text on their social media posts either. Those leagues do not have audio descriptions on videos. They also have a smaller staff. So the teams who are putting alt text on social media, or the leagues who are doing that on the women's side, should be really commended, because they have a smaller staff of individuals running their social media accounts. They are still facing the same gaps as on the men's side, putting audio descriptions on videos, and then really thinking about ways that they can work to ensure the accessibility gaps in stadiums, and also really working to ensure that their hiring processes are accessible for everyone.
So the second group I want to ask about is, we see the amount of money that's going into college sports now. We've seen the consolidation of the conferences. We see all of these NIL deals and funding that's going on within the universities. What do you see at the major college level, the major conferences, in terms of how those
Yeah.
schools are typically doing?
At the major conference level, out of the top 120 Division I schools, only 2 of them are putting alt text on their photos on the athletic department side. And on the academic side of those 2 schools, they are not putting alt text on their social media posts. None of those schools are putting audio descriptions on videos. The conferences, the 30 or 31, are not doing that either. No alt text, no audio descriptions on videos. The NCAA itself is not doing this either, nor are the college football playoff, as well as the bowl games. But it's all about just changing that mindset and showing them that people who have disabilities really just want to be a part of sports and really deserve these opportunities. I've been blind my entire life, so being blind does not bother me. You mentioned earlier how everyone has went through their life and had a time where maybe they hurt their foot, or could think about what it might be like to be possibly disabled for a short period of time. It can become either even harder if someone develops his or her disability partway through their life, whether that be in a wheelchair, or becoming blind, or becoming deaf, or developing a learning disability through a brain injury, because they can remember back to when they were able to drive or when they were able to see. And realizing now that they cannot do these things, or they have to accept help, makes it a lot harder for them. Leagues, teams, and companies could gain so much more customers or fans. They could also gain more loyal individuals who want to be a part of their brands, whether they have a disability or not. And they could also create ways where their staff could engage with people who have disabilities, going with them to events, creating events where people who have disabilities can have experiences. And it all comes to form a place where people who have disabilities really have opportunities to live the American dream. This is why people come to America from foreign countries, is to experience the freedoms and opportunities that America has to offer. And this is what people who have disabilities deserve in this country.
Well, Bryce, we applaud the work that you're doing. I know you've put enormous number of hours into doing that research and identifying which teams and leagues and organizations are performing adequately. Sports Philanthropy Network is excited to announce the work that we're going to be doing with Beautiful Lives Project and how we're going to collaborate to put additional awareness out there and get organizations to understand that these are changes that they really need to make and need to make as soon as possible, in order to include people in these sports experiences. So I want to thank you for coming on the show with us today. Your insight has been tremendous. I want to give you a couple minutes if there's any other areas that we didn't get a chance to cover that you wanted to share with our audience.
The Beautiful Labs Project is always doing events across the country. I'm doing events throughout the Midwest. I was at a Triple Crown softball event last week where adults and children with disabilities were able to play on the field with AAU high school softball players and learn softball skills. We've done events with cheerleading and dance teams. Tony Gianfrido, our executive director, does great events on the East Coast with Boston College football, Long Island Sharks football, Central Connecticut State football and basketball. Any other events Tony can get his hands on the East Coast. We are always looking for more events across the entire country. I will go travel anywhere to run an event. So people can reach out to me at Bryce at beautifullives.org, BRYCE at beautifullives.org. And those events could be in sports such as cheerleading, dance, basketball with men's or women's teams, high school teams, college teams. We also do events in art. So it could be painting or sculpture or ballet. And we just want to help people who have disabilities to have these experiences. Beautiful Lives Project events are open to adults and children of any disability or any age. We've had someone as young as 4 participate in an event or as old as 82. And they all come together as one group of participants to learn skills, create lifelong friendships, and have these experiences together. Putting people with different and similar disabilities together can create friendships and create a pathway to overcome obstacles and challenges. If there's anyone who's willing to donate to the Beautiful Lives Project, that helps us to purchase any accommodations for the event, also to cover insurance costs of the event, and to help cover either my travel or Tony's travel across the country so we can be there at the events. And they can donate on our website, which is www.beautifullives.org. They can also watch some videos and read news articles of our past events across the country and check out the event calendar for upcoming events in their area of the country.
Well, Bryce, I want to thank you for sharing all of that. This insight has been amazing. I know that most people don't know this, don't think about it often enough, and it's, one of our missions is to help get this up to the point that the numbers that you're talking about really are much higher when you talk about only 2 universities that are close to being in compliance and using alt text and things like that. That's embarrassing. I think that we need to do a much better job. So as you know, that's something that you and I have pledged to work on together, and we look forward to continuing that initiative. So thank you for taking time to be with us on the show today.
Thank you so much, Roy, for having me on. It's been great being friends with you, and I'm excited to listen and experience what we're able to create together with yourself and everyone watching this and others we're able to bring in moving forward.
And for all of our viewers and listeners, we appreciate you taking time to join us on the Sports Philanthropy podcast. I'm your host, Roy Kessel, signing off. Please remember to live generously. Thank you.